Hi, this is Georgie with Fempower Health, and today's guest believes women deserve a completely different approach to aging, one rooted in science, not guesswork. Roma Vanderwalt is a sports scientist, women's health expert, and former Team Germany modern pentathlete who's turned her passion for performance into a mission to help women thrive at every stage of life. She's coached and supported thousands of women through pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. And now, as the CEO and founder of Vitelle, she's building what she calls health intelligence infrastructure, a way to connect the dots between our doctors, our data, and our day-to-day lives so women can take charge of their longevity. From elite athletics to the United Nations, from maternal health to AI-enhanced care, Roma brings a global perspective and a deeply personal commitment to rethinking what it means to live well and live long in a woman's body. So, why does this matter? Women's health has been siloed and fragmented for decades, and that's a big problem when it comes to longevity. Every wearable, every specialist, every data point lives in its own world. Roma's work is about building the missing layer that connects them all, so women aren't just living longer, but living better with care that actually sees the whole person. Roma, welcome to Fempower Health. It is such a pleasure to have you here. This is my first time reading the intro instead of having you do it because I wanted to make sure that it really spoke to the amazing work that you're doing. And I hope I did it justice and beyond. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Georgie. I'm really happy to be here. No, you encompass that perfectly. A friend of mine recently said I traded podiums for purpose. I don't think that purpose is gone, but it's definitely been the one thing that has got me through all of the transitions from sport to working in the United Nations and then back to sport. And now we're here.
I think we need to talk about this term longevity. Let's just start there and define it. I've been listening to Outlive, which is Peter Attia's book, and it's, I think, 17 hours. And I resisted listening to it actually because I feel like longevity has become such a fad term. And then I decided, and I really have enjoyed listening to the book, which is also why I'm so intrigued to have this conversation. But because it is becoming such a fad, like I think we need to really set the stage for how does someone like you define it and what might we be getting wrong in society about this term?
Yeah. I mean, I think longevity was really born out of the desire that a lot of male figures and influential figures had that was more rooted in lifespan. I think the reality for a lot of men is that there are more decades than for a woman during which they can still tap into more power. And then, there is andropause and there is a decline for men as well. But I think what we started seeing during the pandemic was really this focus on biohacking. It was focused on lifespan. It was like, how long can we live? Do we want to live to 100? Do we want to live to 120? And for women or female physiology, the conversation was very much around perimenopause and menopause, which was rooted in negative symptom experiences. And so while the men took off and tapped into their potential, we stayed behind and we said, oh, this is going to be horrible. And it was getting younger and younger. So women in their 30s are going to have horrible symptoms. Women already have more chronic conditions. And then wait for your 40s, it's going to be awful. Basically, at 40, you fall off a cliff. At 50, it's all over. And then the conversation in the female space started becoming very divided. It was like perimenopause and menopause, and you either treat it with prescriptions or you don't treat it. And then that makes you kind of hippie. And for me, when we started talking about female longevity in 2023, it was moving us away from becoming this negative symptom tracking machine and actually looking at the big audacious goals that we all have for our health, for our beauty, for how we live our social life, and saying we deserve the same thing as they deserve. But maybe we don't call it biohacking because that feels aggressive. We don't want lifespan. We want healthspan. every single woman I talk to does not want to live to 100 or 120. She wants to live really well for as long as she can. And then she basically, that determines how long she wants to live. And so I wanted to turn a little further away from perimenopause and menopause as a stage, and really focus on what can we still unlock, and what makes this more something to aspire to rather than something to focus on as this constant negative.
Yes, I really love that definition, and I think that that is so incredibly important. So I'd love to dive into this. So I never really thought about this as the way men look at it versus women, but you are absolutely right with how we're looking at menopause. And it's interesting because you and I are both very much in this women's health circle. And so we're hearing probably so much more than the average person about what the message is about menopause, trying to be a lot more positive, et cetera. But it's still a very loud message. How have you seen the dialogue with menopause shifting since you've really been focused in this space and COVID up until now? Because I will tell you, even 3 years ago, when I interviewed people on menopause, most people didn't even know what it was. And now there's so many books that I don't know if anyone could ever read all of them. There's that many. So talk to us about that shift and how far off you think we are from the message we really need to be hearing.
Well, I think I applaud every founder, every doctor, every author that has paved the way, even before 2020, with their books and their social media channels. They walked so we could run, right? So
Yes.
they've done a lot of education, and they've really cracked that space wide open. I think it has contributed to the fact that we actually know what peri is versus what menopause is. We now know that there's postmenopause, and menopause is really that moment when you are without a period for 12 months. We've finally given some of the awful symptoms a lot more airtime, so we could talk about them and also share experiences on how we're dealing with them. I think what we're not taking into account more broadly is prevention. And prevention is a topic that, again, in Europe is much, or even, 30 years ago, because it was rooted in the healthcare system. So because the healthcare system was free, or predominantly free, you went to every checkup. So you went to the dentist twice a year, you went to your OBGYN once to twice a year, you went to your primary care physician once a quarter, and that was something that was just on your calendar. It wasn't a thing that you had to consider, what's my copay? Oh, I have to wait for symptoms to see that person. And then depending on the size of city that you lived in or the size of town, that person actually knew you over years. And so they knew you really well. And so they could kind of read you like a book. And for me as an athlete, I had it even better. So I had that primary care physician. I had a coach that wrote all my training plans, but also knew what I looked like and how I felt when I walked into a training session. I had an orthopedic surgeon on standby, physical therapy, massage, lymphatic drainage, nutrition, and psych. So, and these people actually orchestrated their care really well, which meant that I never had to think about whether I might be trending unwell. And if I really had something that happened, they would act in an instant. And I can give you an example. I walked out of swim class or swim training, and I was 6 weeks out from a European championship, and I tripped on the last step and I tore my tendon. I could hear it snap. And it was like, my first thought was, my coach is going to be so mad. And then my second thought was, okay, who's around? Like, what can I do? And within less than 5 minutes, my foot was in an ice bucket. So I had minimal swelling. Within half an hour, I was at the orthopedic surgeon and had an x-ray. I think within an hour, I was at my physical therapist, and they started lymphatic drainage so that the little tiny bit of swelling that was there was gone. And then they've, put me in a boot. And then my coach adjusted my training for the week, which meant I did aqua jogging and I did anything from the waist up, essentially, that I could do. In less than a week, I was jogging on turf barefoot. And 6 weeks later, I ran and got a sixth place at the European Championships. That's what prevention is. That's what it means to have a care team that is this beautiful orchestra and that really hums together. And this was a smaller town, and these people knew each other very well. But this is what we can now unlock with machine learning and AI.
So tell us more about that. So first I will say, like, this is incredible that you had that support system. So generally speaking, um, it does seem like a lot of these longevity discussions are for the privileged few. I mean, you were in a situation where you were an athlete and had all that access. I know that in the interviews that I've done on the podcast, so much of it is an access issue with all of these things that true experts know. Not all of us have access to that information. So, can you talk to us from this access perspective? Just so for anyone who's listening who's like, yeah, I'm not an athlete, I'm turning off this podcast right now. So, how, because I think what you're sharing is a very good example, but not everyone has access to that. And even if it was minimal, physician visits, even that can be challenging to access. So, maybe you could just kind of level set that and then we can continue.
Yeah. No, look, I don't have that access anymore. I'm a mere mortal now. I've coined the term non-athlete, regular female, the NARF.
I'm glad I asked you this question.
I have the pieces of the puzzle in my own life. And depending on the city I've lived in the last 15 years, I've had the pieces were very good. Right now, they're not great, to be honest. And they're very few, like they are never going to touch. Maybe through the technology we're building, but it's going to take time. It is absolutely a question of access. I do think that despite that, women in particular are doing their best to having the different pieces. And they, again, every community that I've joined through becoming a mother or, people who are really into health and wellness, my first question is always, who's your go-to, acupuncturist, massage therapist? Do you have a good physical therapist? And so little by little, you can find these exceptional doctors and practitioners. I see it on WhatsApp groups. I see it in person, but they are still not connected. So I think women are doing their best to creating their own longevity playbook while also then trying to decipher their biometrics and their wearable integration. But I don't think it's enough because those pieces don't like to talk to each other. So when I talk to people in the longevity space, the persistent notion is still that everybody has to build the Ferrari first. And then eventually it's all going to trickle down and we'll reach population health and it's going to be fine and public health. And I think, can we meet somewhere in the middle? Can we build like the Volkswagen? Can we build like, I don't know, the Ford, so that people can have access to it. And there is no lack of companies and funding to build a middle ground or a tiered system where people can access prevention. And if we want to call it female longevity and make it sound sexy, that's great. But yeah, I do not believe that the access thing is true. Right now, it feels more that it might be trending a little predatory, right? Like we want people to spend more money and everybody's focused on acquisition. So the competition and the heat is on. And then the other part is also it's quite exclusive, right? Like it's a better headline to say that someone is spending $2 million a year on like optimizing himself. And then people look up to that. Like that's way more exciting than saying, oh, look, Roma eats her lightest meal at night and prioritizes sleep and is so boring that she actually naps on the weekend. It's not exciting, but it's probably as impactful. Well, it's not as impactful, but it's a good start. It's a good.
Well, it's interesting. So you were saying, you started with in Europe because of the way access works there. Everyone just has these automatic annual visits on the books. And then as an athlete, you have this whole cross-functional team. So maybe what we can do is, what I'm struggling with is, do we take this into the eventual idealized perspective or do we stay practical? And I'm a practical person, so I'm going to stick to who I am. And what I would love to do is make people feel that longevity is accessible, but helping them understand some of the challenges that are at play and what they can do to feel more in control of their own longevity. But you can overlay so much of your expertise in the work that you've been doing in the past few years. So from a baseline perspective, what's interesting is, in all these years I've been doing the interviews before perimenopause became understood, what I would hear a lot of my friends saying is once we're done having children, what do we do? We're like the missing middle. What happens after that? And you spoke about this prevention aspect. So help us understand what true prevention looks like. And may I just qualify for those who do not go to their annual exams with your primary care physician, please go. I am healthy. I'm 51. I am not overweight. And I go every year, and my blood work is trending bad. And this last workup that I did, I now have to do a follow-up visit because my blood work was that bad. And so, like, I'm even thinking that's the baseline. So, what are the things that we need to be proactive about? And then I would love to layer on all of these apps and watches and all of these things and how that is helping or hurting us and how we need to consider that in our longevity. So let's talk about this baseline and outside of just check, let's go to these annual visits. Like, what are we really trying to prevent and why do we need to do it early? Just like our skincare routine, right?
Yes. I mean, that's a good example. And I think that's something that, again, some cultures, some nations have prioritized differently. And it's more hitting the mainstream now. Now I could go off on a tangent here. I won't. About skincare in very young women, young girls coming of age.
Let's not even. Okay.
No.
Yeah. We're skipping that one.
Yeah. So prevention, I think, annual physicals are sort of the minimum, and knowing that there's at least someone who's going to take the time to listen and hear our concerns. I have a whole thing about when they are usually scheduled and why that shouldn't be. So, you know how in a woman's life there are these big breaks. So it's usually Christmas and then there's summer. And whether you have children or not, there's a lack of structure. There's an increase of meals. There's probably an increase of like alcohol. And then we schedule our annual physical in January. So you're coming off of this big break. You've indulged. You've seen all your friends. I would say mental and emotional is hopefully in a good place, unless family was just a lot. But you're coming off of that, and someone goes, now let's look at your biomarkers. This is a great time for a snapshot. And then you disappear for 11 months. And I think, why can we test people in like October? Like someone has come off, like Labor Day in the US rolled around, everybody gets back into their routine, everybody's motivated. Summer is still like on the way out, but it's nice and warm. You can actually exercise outside anywhere in the country. Or like late spring, where people have they're like, summer is coming, I'm going to be really active. So I find the time when we schedule annual physicals kind of silly. You're probably a little heavier. There's nothing for your self-esteem. But that's just a start. And then I think, everything that I do, whether it's in talking to women or also through the company and the startup, I break everything down into 4 areas. So sleep, exercise, stress management, and then nutrition. So if just the awareness of those 4 components and then realizing, maybe I'm really good at the sleep bit, so don't need to focus on that too much. But then exercise could use a little bit more. So identifying like one of these areas and going, okay, I can do that. If you have recent blood test results and there's certain biomarkers that are receptive to exercise, for example, focusing on that. If you don't have the resources to have a personal trainer, finding like an accountability buddy. So that if you're going for a walk in the morning, you have someone who's going to be there, so you're more likely to show up. Do exercise snacks. So instead of forcing yourself to a 40-minute HIIT class, go and do 10 minutes of squats or find out how many push-ups you can do. Go to the park with your kids, and when they're on the monkey bars, just hang from the monkey bar and see if you can hit at least 30 seconds. That's a pretty good marker for longevity. So there are little things like that. And I don't know if you want me to dive into how I see some best practices in each of them. But I do think that in midlife, so at 35, we start losing a lot. And that's not something that is a bad symptom, like a hot flash yet, but it's something that is measurable. So we start losing bone mineral density, we start losing muscle mass, we start losing our hormones, which means that with that probably goes some of our cognition, our stress resilience, our sleep. And so it's definitely the time for people to lock in and, okay, I need to be more aware. I think awareness is really where it starts.
It's fair. I agree with you about the awareness piece because I think that's another thing I've learned in interviewing or an insight I've gained in interviewing all of these experts is we aren't really taught what we need to be aware of. Now, here's a question though. When I was 35, it was before we had all of these trackers. I think back then there was a period tracker and that was it. And it was actually pretty crappy. This was before like the more modern ones. And now you could spend hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a year on various trackers. And so talk to me about how we need to look at this awareness and prevention and how that ties to our trackers and how that either helps or harms our life.
Yeah, I think, again, a lot of these wearables were embraced by men first, and they were embraced by athletes first. I mean, athletes have used trackers, male or female, for as long as they know. So, I ran with a Polar strap, which is the heart rate measuring, around my chest and chafed every summer, probably from the age of 10. And we've come a long way because now a Garmin watch can measure your heart rate on your wrist and it's accurate, and it can even predict your VO2 max, which I have on good authority is actually pretty accurate to doing a full-blown test. The wearable conversation needs to start including women because it's another piece of awareness. And then we would need to go one step further and actually start explaining to women how their physiology differs and why they need to read some of the data points a little differently. And so then if you combine the awareness of which area they need the most support in with the actual data that they're seeing, and you can put that in context, I think that's something that women are already doing individually. I've seen it done at all levels, like people who just check their wearable once a day to people who have a full Excel spreadsheet of wearable data plus biomarker data from their last blood test result, plus color coding, plus like mental and emotional. But yeah, for me, everything when it comes to prevention and longevity is around context and
That's
not
fair.
losing different pieces of it.
No, that's fair. You were mentioning that with a lot of these wearables and trackers, it's not necessarily what I gathered from what you were saying is not necessarily specified and accurate for women. Did I hear that right? And if so, can you
Yeah,
tell me more about that? Because I think that's a huge, huge thing that we need to look at.
it's accurate. It's just in its analysis, it's different. So first of all, most wearables have their own proprietary scores. People who use an Oura would be aware that there's your score, your sleep score, for example, and we don't know exactly what factors into it, nor do we know exactly when some of these data points are actually pulled to like then influence that score. I have a really good sleep score generally across any wearable. And I also know that I will never get 100 because of one area, for example, and that's that I fall asleep very fast. And then there's some women who are overly fatigued at the end of the day and have no latency. And so there's a lack of personalization right there. The other piece that I recently wrote about was HRV. After I saw somebody on LinkedIn talking about how his HRV is super high, like over 100. It was 103, which is super impressive. But it's a very delicate data point that reacts to a lot of changes in physiology. And so for women, the perceived notion of stress can have a negative impact. And then you could argue that maybe the lack in estrogen in midlife and progesterone and testosterone will make you more susceptible to being less stress resilient, which then makes you more anxious, which then makes you perceive stress before it's even happened. For a lot of women, I would say take your HRV with a grain of salt, look at trends over a longer period of time. There's different metrics that I think can be analyzed in a different way. And then there are shortcomings of wearables in what they actually measure really well, which is often like one or two things. So each wearable has like one area where they hit it out of the ballpark and then areas where they're not as great. So in a way, you almost need multiple to create that whole picture. I would rather that there was a technology that just goes, oh, hey, Roma just did a workout in the gym. For that, if she wore her sports watch, that was really useful. And now we're getting really accurate data. And then she went to bed and she wore a ring. So we're going to use that, which then makes the technology a little more agnostic.
So is this what you're referring to as the health intelligence infrastructure?
Yes, that's a big piece.
Tell me more about that and where like what is the world that we should be getting to, and tell us more about this health intelligence infrastructure?
Yeah, I think we have point solutions on the one end, right? We have telehealth, which has seen this exorbitant growth through the pandemic, which was necessary and life-saving. And it still fulfills like a really important piece. But now that's sort of, you have that in the health system, but you also have it in digital health. We now have prescriptions that are direct to consumer that are coming basically after like a questionnaire or a survey, which is really quick. And again, it's a point solution. Then we have diagnostics. And diagnostics are probably the biggest field where I personally feel like, and what now? We have access to so many biomarkers and epigenetic testing and the microbiomes. And there's an end of a journey where all the mental load of analysis, but then also next steps lands on the patient or the person. Some of these solutions now have tied in telehealth, which is better. But now we have one point solution plus a second point solution. And then the next step still rests on the end user, who then has to decide, this resolved my issue or it didn't resolve my issue. Should I buy another test? Should I seek out another telehealth solution, or should I go to my primary care physician? So it's a lot. And the mental load is real. And it means, I think, especially for women, life is already full with all of those decisions that they have to make and all the project management of their life. And in midlife, you take aging parents and you take maybe children and you take exploding careers. And I really want to see it where the patient has to do less of the triaging while just complying with the things that they can bring to the table. And then if we look into this like big future, we have, the sector of people who never want to die. And then we have a sector of people talking about AI avatars. So those avatars could be like patients. They could be the identical, what are they called? Well, there's avatars for work that I heard of where people go, oh, you could show up in multiple meetings at the same time. Yeah. And so basically my thinking is there one brain who's like, is this going to cause me to like crash like an overloaded operating system? Or is this really going to be a true outsourcing where it's an identical twin, right? In medical, we now have twins. So health twins or medical twins that are being built to basically mimic what is happening in your body. And then I think care pathways and solutions that can be tailored to that. I think before we jump like all the way to a twin, which I'm assuming is also not going to be necessarily accessible, I would really want us to have that layer. So in an ideal world, we never have a separation between how the person applies themselves in the home through like good self-care as much as they can. And some people can't because they don't know where to begin. But then we also have the incredible medical field that's also burnt out and is supposed to now be a full like performance scientist and understand biometrics and novel biomarkers and microbiomes. And for them, their life to be made easier. And so that's what we've built. It's essentially closing the gap between the two sectors and making life easier for both of them.
You mentioned AI can really help us with this. So tell us more about how this world can get intersected or to work together. Because I think in the beginning, you were discussing how there's a lot more acquisitions and all of these sorts of things that are happening in healthcare, but I'm not necessarily seeing the way our health is cared for optimized. Like, I'll be honest, when I got my blood results, took screenshots of all of them, uploaded them into ChatGPT, and was like, can you help me analyze this trend? Because this is freaking me out. And what I did is I went in and gave all the data points of my life that I probably wouldn't have even thought to bring up to my doctor. And I just wanted to like go back and forth with it to figure out how to have that conversation. And then he and I were in the electronic health record, just messaging back and forth on what to do on the next appointment. But I used the AI to help me figure it out. But that was like a lot of time. And I'm not even, by the way, also tracking. Like I have this watch that I only tracked my running when I was training for the marathon, but I don't use it for anything else. And I think everyone uses these. So it's either you have them and you use them for one or two things, but then you still need all these data points. So I see like there's the over tracker, the under tracker, and then these, like it's such a crazy puzzle.
Yeah, but I'll give you a really simple example, even before having a tracker. So basically saying if a person doesn't have a tracker yet, we're not faulting them for not having a tracker or not having the resources to get a tracker. But in midlife right now, when people get prescribed hormone replacement therapy, it's the same dosage for everyone to start with. It's usually the same type of application. So often women get started off on a patch and then also an oral medication. And it's based on symptoms, any symptoms, right? Like if there is a symptom and you come in and you say, I'm a woman of a certain age, then you probably get started with that starter pack. If your doctor doesn't know what's going on at home, and that includes your behavior, your symptoms, persisting symptoms, then what's happening now is if you come back and you message them, for example, and you go, I still have symptoms, then they go, well, then we're going up. The same happens with thyroid medication and the same happens with GLP-1s. It's the fastest way to like say, well, we're going to get this person relief. We're going to go up and eventually it's going to work. But we've already seen things with the data that we look at where it might have been a lifestyle factor. It might have been a supplement. Like, wow, the wild west of supplements right now. Nobody's taking those into account when prescribing. It might have been that somebody got 3 different prescriptions from 3 different sources. And they either on purpose or conveniently forgot to mention this to the person prescribing this rather intense prescription, which is hormone replacement therapy. So if there's a contraindication, and you're not made aware of that as the end user, your symptoms might not go away, or they might pop up in a different way, but still be attributed to the symptoms you had before you got the prescription. And if your provider is not aware of what you're doing and other things that might factor in, then they're just going up as it's always been and according to plan, and because that's the care pathway. And so this is where an infrastructure layer like that also creates better retention. Because if your symptoms don't go away and it's a digital health offering, you might go, I paid them X amount of money. They didn't solve my problem. It wasn't super personalized. It's a little transactional. It's online. But wait, I still have that primary care physician. Now I've gone around the stigma of asking them for the prescription first. So now I have a prescription. So they have to take me seriously and treat me according to what's going on right now. So maybe I'll just drop this digital health offering. I'll go back to my primary care physician, and then I'll have an actual face-to-face conversation with them. And often we think that if we go in face-to-face, that's how they will support us. And now that digital health offering has lost you as a customer because the retention piece wasn't built in.
You know, it's funny. So as you're talking, 2 things come to mind. One, I wanted to mention, like I don't know if people noticed I was nodding about the supplement. One of my blood levels, we think it's because I've been using the collagen powder, because at this age, they're saying you need more protein, and there is no way that I can do the protein or take in as much protein as I need to until I take those powders. And so I am off those for the next month until I get my blood work done again. And he said, increase water and really have much more of the plant-based protein in your diet, not as much of the animal. And so I was like, wait, what? Here I thought I was doing the check the box, all the right things. And thank goodness I knew what to tell him about what I had changed since he saw me last year. But that trend in the blood work was terrible. But then the other piece that when you were talking is with respect to the interconnectedness, I'm thinking of a friend of mine who diligently needs to close the loop. I guess that's on, I don't have an Apple Watch, so I think it's an app for those who don't have an Apple Watch. On Apple Watches, I guess you have a goal and you have to close your circle to it means you've achieved your goal. Is that a correct summary? Okay. And wouldn't it be so cool if we could take all of these data points and rather than, because I think right now we think of it in an overly simplified way of whatever that metric is, right? We don't even know. Like for my friend, it's closing the loop on her steps. For me, it's, I don't know, did I feel good today. And for you, your metric might be something else. But wouldn't it be cool if we had like our own score that took into account like the 4 buckets you were describing in the beginning, to then say, here are the things you need to work on? And I don't think we're getting that. We're just getting data on check your sleep, check this, check on that, or bad on this, bad on that. But it's not the whole person data point.
No. And I'll tell you, and until you do the like mental gymnastics yourself. So I gave myself, and I'm pretty sure that it was a creatine, which I gave myself a side effect that was really, really gnarly.
Really?
I ended up with really bad neurological, neuralgia pain in the head. And with the experts that I work with, I retraced my steps and I was like, what changed? What changed? What changed? And we landed on the creatine and I took it out and the side effect started coming down and it's almost gone. So, it's one of those supplements that everybody says every woman should be on. And I wasn't even on a high dosage. So then we retraced our steps a little bit more and we went, okay, Roma is a former athlete. So maybe she's already over indexing on creatine production anyway. And then also I eat all foods. Like I'm an omnivore, so I also eat animal protein. So then maybe I was getting enough creatine there, and maybe the creatine I was taking was too much, even though I was taking half of what's recommended on the box. And then we said, well, and let's look at her training volume right now. Maybe I actually wasn't training hard enough to even justify having that much creatine having that much creatine in my system to then have the energy output. And I felt really good on it. I was recovering well, but that's the trade-off, right? Like, why should I live with debilitating headaches around the clock? And then if you go the medical route, my provider said, it's a migraine. I said, it's not a migraine. She's like, it's a migraine. I said, it's not a migraine. She's like, I'll prescribe you a migraine medication. I'm like, you do that. I picked it up. I took it once. It didn't help. It made me feel terrible. And now I'm getting reminders about refilling my migraine medication.
And meanwhile, it was stopping the supplement. I will tell you, like, I mean, this is no joke. And the thing is, I know that our clinicians even ask us to list out the supplements, but I don't even know if they all would
I don't think people
know. Yeah, I don't think they would even know what to do with that. So going back to the book Outlive, so I haven't listened to the whole thing. The one thing that I did love is how in the sections that I've listened to so far, Peter Attia breaks it down to like medicine 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And I think what we're discussing with the interconnectedness of all the data sets of visiting a doctor plus all the things we wear in our chat GPTs and whatever. But I do think it important to address the physical aspects of the healthcare system, this 2.0 versus 3.0, because even if we have all these data sets, right, the actual interaction within our healthcare system is still a challenge, because it's not like right now our primary care doctor is kind of the medicine 3.0 in the sense that he or she is the person. Luckily, mine was supposed to retire and he misses his patients. So he keeps telling me every August he's going to make a decision. So he's very tenured. So I'm incredibly lucky because he has decades of experience with patients and training and whatnot. But we're not all going to have that kind of doctor. And, so even that primary care may or may not be able to help us. But then it's like, is it the neurologist? Is it the rheumatologist? Is it the cardiologist? Is it the endocrinologist? Like who would you even see next? Because it's all fragmented. And I've shared even something as simple as mental health. So the OBGYN would prescribe the patch because we know estrogen has an impact on brain health. And my psychiatrist would prescribe the mental health meds. But the estrogen patch was helping my mental health, and I had to be the go-between. So that's something simple. That's not even a massive chronic condition. So we kind of almost have 2 segments of what we need to fix in longevity. There's the digital aspects of it and how that aligns to our life, but even the healthcare system in and of itself and navigating who in the heck you even go to get the help that you need, right?
Well, when you said I put all my data, historical and current, into ChatGPT, that raises a lot of concerns too, right? So now we're talking about people for themselves, putting, identifiable information that is very, very, very detailed into an LLM that we know hasn't been trained on women. So there's two ways this goes. One is this all lives in an LLM that also knows
Me.
how you feel
Yeah.
sometimes, that knows what you like to shop. If it's on an app, I mean, somebody brought this up again recently. Do I think that this crossover into any of the fintech apps on our phone? I really hope not. But it is a bit of a data security issue. And since reading that, I've become a little bit more careful to giving it too complete of a picture. Um, sorry. And then the second piece is, if you don't know what the response should be, how do you know it's correct? So I've put in tons of hypothetical scenarios. I've put them in for an athlete. I've put them in for a regular woman. I've put in what happens during menstrual phase X in correlation to biometrics, Y in correlation to symptoms. And I think in the performance one stood out because I said, and then what kind of VO2 max does this woman have? And the thing already started having trouble. And then I said, can you visualize that in a graph? That was a total disaster. And about 2 or 3 prompts down, it gave me a number that was so outlandish. And I said, wait, let me retrace my steps. So then I retraced my steps. It popped out. It had based the whole calculation on a men's VO2 max. So it basically went back to what it knows and said, well, if we're looking at men between 35 and 55, their average VO2 max would be 50 plus, and maybe at the high end, 60 plus. But most women are not getting much above 40. And so if you don't know what the result should be, you're going to rely on a hallucinating LLM, and it's going to give you information, which is also the problem what we're seeing with LLM wrappers right now in digital health, where someone goes, we're either going to offer a chatbot and the chatbot is just going to tell you, yes, you're right. Okay. Yes, you're right. Or if it's built into the offering, if it starts hallucinating, that's really dangerous because we haven't had data sets to train these LLMs in a really, really deep way.
Yeah. No, you're right. So 2 things. One, I will say when I put in my own data, I did ask my doctor to verify the thinking because to exactly your point. But then there's also the privacy issue, which I do worry about. And I always am trying to be careful in what I put in there. But then the other piece, for those who aren't aware, women weren't mandated to partake in clinical trials until the 90s. And a lot of research is based on the male default. And so if you think of all AI primarily being programmed based on this sort of data, what does that mean for our future? So I want to add this interesting data point. There's a gentleman that was interviewed, I think, on TED Radio Hour, and he is a man who has predicted so much of the technological advancements that we never thought would be possible, but that are today. And his most recent prediction is that in 5 years, and if I misunderstood his intention or am miswording it, I apologize, but this is what my takeaway was, that in 5 years, we won't need humans for clinical trials. And I was like, I am sure that that is technologically possible, but the impact on women is tragic.
Yeah, that seems aggressive when I think it's probably going to take us 2 to 3 years to even catch up on just the data sets that we
Right?
really need.
I know.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to, I need to go look up that episode and reach out to him and see if he'll get back to me and just say, can you please explain this? Because this is probably the most terrifying data point I have ever heard about what's going to happen with technology.
Yeah, I'd love to hear I mean, that has to be based on models. That has to be based on
Right?
calculations that just become so much smarter at such a fast rate that in 5 years we'll have taken every probability into account. And maybe, look, if we all manage to expand those data sets in the next 3 years, I could see how the data could be ingested in a really satisfactory way for these trials. But can we also first help women?
I know. So this is actually a great segue for our closing then. So we've talked about, I think it is important that understanding our health is complex. I do agree. I think women, we just want to live long and healthy. Like we just want to live our best selves as long as possible. And I'm so happy we did not make this a menopause conversation, by the way. I almost want to be like, how many times can we avoid saying the word?
Yeah.
Only because it's just, I mean, it's wonderful that it's being discussed so much, but I want to bring it out of that because I think so many people are still like afraid of it. And it's a life stage. But nonetheless, we are in this complex, fast evolving world. And so if you like, what is it that we should be taking away based on your expertise? Like, what can we do today that is practical? And what do you see in like the nearest term future that is reachable for where we can get to get on this path, this ideal path of technology and our longevity?
Yeah, I think there's really no shortcut right now to just apply AI as it currently exists. I think it will take scientists and MDs, doctors, to come together. And the way it's actually done in the athletic world, where the full team behind her includes both. I unfortunately still see a bit of a separation of the two. We're seeing MDs who, rightfully so, feel like they've been stretched thin, and now people just want to dump AI on top and they have to become longevity experts. And they speak up and they go, we've been underpaid, we study forever, we have these massive student loans and we are very much the experts. But performance scientists, for example, and sports scientists have been working on the applied science in a person's life forever. So marrying the two is like one part of this beautiful future world for me, especially for me as a sports scientist. When I say we can't take any shortcuts, I think every data set that emerges is hard earned and has to be scaled. So we're seeing big players partner and then create another solution that is still omitting a big part of the context. So if we take reproductive health plus a wearable that is focused on one data point, then we're omitting midlife health potentially, or, but we're also omitting all the other data points that one wearable doesn't do so well. And I mean, I love them all. I think, we're seeing some pretty crazy wearables come out now that are actually going to do more than just data collection. They're actually going to start affecting our physiology in a positive way. So I honestly, in that regard, that's just how companies work, how value propositions work. But we want to do a small part with our infrastructure, where if a woman is with one provider and there's that infrastructure layer in the middle and they now can serve her really well, if she is with another provider that specializes in something that is still really important to her, but they don't currently work together, she doesn't lose the ecosystem. But we are still not a consumer play. We're not selling this to the woman because we finally want to take the burden of being the ecosystem off of the woman.
Right.
So it's really asking the bigger players to go, yes, we do need to understand more of who she is. She is a 360-degree wonderful person who is also incredibly cyclical, whether it's over her whole reproductive journey or every month, or how, she goes from productive during the school year to not so productive during the summer holidays. And we need to understand that ebb and flow to be able to give her as much of a personalized experience as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And it is so important. I know you've been really dedicated to creating that interconnectedness. And it's important from a business perspective. I mean, unfortunately, healthcare is a business, especially here in the US. And the question is always, who's going to care to pay for it, right? And that's the challenge with all of these startups. And by the way, just a quick aside is this is not my typical podcast interview. I've been interviewing the clinicians on a specific, I've been like healthcare 2.0, right? And I feel like Fempower Health needs to get to 3.0, where it's like, let's talk about PCOS and let's talk about pelvic health. Let's talk about prolapse. It's been very siloed, but what I'm really passionate about is helping people understand the root of why the healthcare system is the way it is and why we're struggling. And, as all of these startups are trying to help change the healthcare system, the question is always, who's going to pay them to help them be successful to drive these overall health outcomes? I will say, at least from health insurance perspective, thank goodness they're finally starting to have these metrics. I mean, they were slowly coming into play, but now they really are looking at value-based care, which is great to see. And, there's a lot of ways to incentivize existing companies as well to be able to look at the whole person.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing payers, providers, we're seeing employers. I think it's actually great where the employee model has gone in the past 5 to 10 years. Like the UN didn't have IVF support, I think, when I was there, not that I'm aware of, but now it does, from what I hear. And that's a whole different beast. That's a nonprofit at the highest level. But I'm saying, the for-profit organizations and companies subsidizing these things, especially for their female workforce, because it is such a huge part of their productivity and their loyalty and their success at work. So I'm actually quite fond of the employer model. I hear differences between payers. There are some the premiums are higher, but they're very proactive, and they've started doing the first step where I hear from patients who go, when I switched to this, payer, they just made sure that all my data came with me. Like I didn't have to go to my old doctor and say, can you fax this over? And wow, what a big burden just taken off you, but also meaning that the new payer has your history, which is so important. They need to know who you were so they can treat you well. So I think I'm hoping that's going to spill over little by little into bigger systems that are not as expensive at the end. There's a huge area now of concierge medicine. That's the cash pay model. Yeah, I mean, that one is not accessible for a lot of people. And then I would say the shortcoming there is that a lot of the interconnectedness happens through being able to be reachable. So email, text, the portal. And I'm like, that is now a context nightmare for the physician's office. And I hear also that they then have to employ additional staff to actually just be able to parse that data and make sense of it. But I think it's coming little by little. And yes, a lot of people still believe that the consumer model is the one that's going to show the outcomes and prove that it needs to scale and grow into something bigger. I feel like if we can show the prevention aspect really well in the consumer, like if companies can show the prevention aspect really well, then it's going to become undeniable for payers in particular because it means they pay out fewer claims. But it's probably still going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this has been such a great conversation because, whether it's an investor, anyone working in the healthcare system, whether it's a clinician, a payer, a startup, I think there's so much richness in the dialogue and the expertise that you've shared. And even as a woman, it's like, I hope the stories that you and I have shared of some concrete examples of our experiences are also helpful to women. Like it's not just closing that loop on the Apple Watch, it's of all the different things that are happening in your life. And it doesn't have to be the crazy Excel spreadsheet a lot of these men are doing with the 10 different apps that they're wearing. But it's just this observation of just like piecing together what is happening in our overall life, whether it's the supplements we're taking, the food we're eating, the kids, the family, what is changing, and take all that into account and it doesn't have, the thing is, I understand concierge medicine. A lot of it is there because they aren't reimbursed properly and they want to take the time with the patient. But here's what I believe. I have my short appointments and I just come in really prepared and I use the telehealth to message. It doesn't always have to be an hour appointment and we shouldn't be intimidated because it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes. If we go in and just take charge and talk about all of this, then I think we can still get better care than we have been.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if frequency is possible, I think going a little more often and just making sure there's fewer gaps is probably the best way to go about it. And that's something that if somebody can still access public health, should probably be doable, especially through telehealth. And then you create a bit more of that historical overview. But I also know that for a lot of people, that's not the case. And if I can leave people with just the simplest, advice for what you can change in your life, it's really prioritizing sleep for everything. And that is, for example, reverse bedtime procrastination. Nothing's won if you stay up because your kid went to bed late versus you going to bed at a normal good time that allows you to fall asleep, it's always going to pay more dividends. I had this big conversation with a friend about don't finish your kids' food. Like we all grew up in the, like clean plate generation. You do not need to clean two plates. No, when you're full, you're full. And if anything at dinner, I actually feel like it's probably when people start trending down a little bit more. From a mental and emotional health standpoint, I love this one is, can you get one 60-second hug a day? It's so good for everything. Your oxytocin, your dopamine. You don't need to have a partner for it. You can have a friend. You can, but make it longer. Like, don't make it a quick lean in. Like, really absorb it. And apparently that unlocks just so much. Nutrition would be the last one. Exercise snacks. That's my favorite. It's really drop down if you're feeling a little out of sorts. Work on your arms, get your Michelle Obama arms, drop down, do 20 triceps dips. You can do them against the couch, against the bed. Sculpted arms is something that never goes out of style. It's something that always elevates anything you wear and makes you feel good in your skin. So that's something I've been telling women for 15 years. I'm like, if you have time for nothing else, drop down, give me 20. Yeah.
What I love all of those tips, and I will echo the sleep is number one. My life is, it revolves around a sleep schedule. Like I need to get better at going to bed earlier, but I am rigid where it's like if I go to bed late, I get up later because sleep is the absolute like, wow, I can't believe the impact it has.
Yeah.
But I love all your tips. They're great. The hug one, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to like make a list of like who all I can, because I'm single and I only have my son 50% of the time. So I have to
Well,
find my hugs.
50%, even if they don't admit it, pull them in close. It's so special. And honestly, I've made it a thing with my kids where I said that that's really good for them and really healthy. It's something that they like. They're really into it now. Uh, 60 seconds feels long initially when you do it. We're just not used to it anymore.
Yeah, I know. It's
Yeah.
crazy. It's crazy. Well, this has been a pleasure. And it's just, the perfect person to speak to because of your athletic background and all of your training and your passion. And you're truly like, I know you, I mean, we've known each other for a little while now, and you're just genuinely such a wonderful human. And you're truly doing this because you want to do the right thing and you know it's the right thing. And so I really appreciate you making time and sharing all of your wisdom.
I love this. I love your questions. And I know we'll have so much to talk about in the coming years. Let's have a really good 2 to 3 year trajectory, even before
Absolutely.
we eliminate people from clinical trials. We've barely been in them.
I know. My
Barely.
God. All right. Thank you so much, Roma.
Thank you.